Hi, my name is Ethan McLeod, and this is my Latino history final. I chose to do a video format for it, and the core of this video is going to be talking about manifest destiny. Before we talk about manifest destiny and what that is, something I kind of want to draw some inspiration from this presentation was you hear in the media all the time why there's so many Latinos in America, these Mexicans, or they're invading and all this other stuff about so many Latino immigrants in this country. And it's funny because the people that are complaining are the people responsible for why you see all of these immigrants coming to this country. And when I say Americans, I'm referring to white America. And going back to the topic of manifest destiny and why white America is responsible for this is because manifest destiny is something made up by white Americans, and it's just basically this superiority complex that they are divine and they are ordained to settle wherever in America, South or North America, and that they're superior, and that this involved practices of removing native people and removing, whatever by any means to be number one, because God told them that. That was the complex and that was the idea that they made up. But in all actuality, what that ended up doing was promoting and supporting violence in Central America, the Caribbean, Mexico, taking advantage of weaker nations with corruption. It led to economic gain, but only on one side, that being the American side. And it also led to a lot of the stuff that goes back to the Cold War, which also just only benefited America. So without further ado, I'm going to go into depth about how manifest destiny is responsible for why we see so many Puerto Ricans, why we see so many Cubans, why we see so many Mexicans, why we see so many El Salvadorians and Hondurans. So, yeah. The concept of manifest destiny, that the United States was destined to expand across North America, influenced American policymakers' views on territorial expansion beyond the continental borders. This resulted in what you see, the annexation of Puerto Rico, which happened in the Spanish-American War of 1898. Now, we fast forward a few decades and look at what happened. Puerto Ricans end up becoming U.S. citizens, but don't get full representation in Congress or have voting rights in the U.S. presidential election. Essentially, these people are not American citizens, but labeled as American citizens. Many Puerto Ricans face economic hardship and social inequality as American businesses dominated key industries back home for them. Additionally, American culture and language led to cultural tension. Though these social economic challenges and cultural shifts promoted significant migration, and as Puerto Ricans sought better opportunities and livelihoods elsewhere, they particularly chose the United States mainland. And a result of them going to the United States mainland, and an overall gist of what I just said was kind of that manifest destiny America used to kind of say, oh, we have this, we're going to expand our quote. All right, the first place we're going to look at regarding manifest destiny is in Puerto Rico. And the concept of manifest destiny, that the United States is destined to expand across North America, influenced American policy makers' views on territorial expansion beyond continental borders. An example of that is when Puerto Rico got annexed in 1898 in the Spanish War. We fast forward a few decades. Puerto Ricans are now U.S. citizens, but don't have full representation in Congress or voting rights in the presidential election. Many Puerto Ricans face economic hardship and social inequalities as American businesses dominated key industries back home. Additionally, American cultures and languages led to cultural tension. These social economic challenges and cultural shifts promoted significant migration, and as Puerto Ricans sought better opportunities and livelihoods elsewhere, they happened to go to the United States in particular. And that is because of manifest destiny. America wanted to have this land, and they ended up getting involved, and they tried to work something out to where they thought they were going to benefit the Puerto Ricans, and they had the Puerto Ricans benefit in mind. But ultimately, they wanted that just to have more territory and further expansion. The result of that is They drove them out because they flooded their key industries and businesses, and that's why you see a lot of Puerto Ricans in the United States. Now, we look at Mexico. Americans needed workers because of something called the Great Migration. A massive group of African Americans migrated from the rural South to the Midwest and northern industrial cities during World War II, seeking better paying jobs and escaping poor living conditions and racist policies. This shift also led to an increase in Mexican immigrant labor in agriculture fields due to labor shortage. This is what made something called the Breakero Program, a series of laws and agreements between the United States and Mexico that legally brought Mexican workers to the U.S. between 1942 and 1964. They were promised nice working conditions, but in all actuality, they did not receive anything compared to what they were promised, and they ultimately ended up living lives in terrible conditions. It was very bad. The result of the Breakero program was that big farm owners that relied on cheap African American labor needed more workers to tend the field in many cases, and Mexican immigrants became the new labor force. And Mexicans in Mexico and the United States worked some things out, and they ended up shipping a whole bunch of Mexicans over there. It got to the point where a lot of these Mexicans were using that as kind of like a work visa to stay, stay in America because there was better opportunities, and that's what started something called Operation Wetback. The whole name itself is a slur, and it was a huge thing that involved mass deportation of Mexican immigrants, and they would deport them far from their homes. They would abuse them, and ultimately, Mexicans face a lot of negative prejudice in our society, even though they've had a long history here. They were actually here before we were even here, and it's ironic that we get mad that they are doing the labor that people here don't want to do, yet they get this bad reputation for it. So Manifest Destiny also influenced Americans' interactions with Cuba and El Salvador during the Cold War. The Spanish-American War in 1898, driven partly by the ideology of Manifest Destiny, which I talked about earlier, led to the United States gaining control over Cuba. American investments poured into the island primarily into sugar production and infrastructure development. Like I said, they were only focused on economic gain, altering Cuba's economy and society is what they advertised to the Cubans. But however, these investments only favored American interests, and they did not favor the local ones. And there was a lot of other things that America did with their interactions within Cuba that influenced a lot of belief. For example, you had the Cuban Revolution in 1959. Fidel Castro's Communist Revolution overthrew U.S.-backed Batista regime, leading to the establishment of the socialist government in Cuba. Then you had the Bay of Pig invasion. The United States attempted to overthrow Castro's government by supporting Cuban exiles in a failed invasion. You got the Cuban Missile Crisis, the most intense moment of the Cold War involving Cuba, and the crisis erupted when America discovered that there was a Soviet missile site in Cuba. Like I said, with Manifest Destiny, you have this idea of being superior, and the fact that Cuba had an ideology that shared one with one of their biggest rivals, the Soviet Union, they felt threatened by that. And that led to them doing the U.S. Embargo Act in response to Cuba's alignment with the Soviet Union and support for revolutionary movement in Latin America and Africa. The U.S. imposed trade embargo on Cuba, which remains large today. And during the Cold War, the relationship between the United States and Cuba was marked as being hostile and tense. And like I said, it all goes back to Manifest Destiny. They did not like the fact that Cubans were against them, and the ideas that America thought were the best ideas. And the U.S. intervention in El Salvador in 1979 was part of the broader Cold War policies aimed at containing communism in Latin America. Following a period of social and political unrest in the U.S., supported the Salvadorian government with military aid, training, and advisory. This intervention intensified the conflict, leading to brutal civil wars that lasted for over a decade and result in significant losses of life and widespread human rights violations. Overall, the U.S. intervention in El Salvador during the period had a profound impact on the country's political landscape and contributed to the prolonged and devastating Salvadorian Civil War, which lasted until 1992. The conflict resulted in, obviously, like I said, a lot of significant lives lost, displacement of population, and that displacement led to a lot of people coming to America. But that left the country with long-lasting consequences, and that is a common thing America kept on doing with Manifest Destiny. In Cuba, I just want to conclude everything that I talked about today. As I mentioned, Manifest Destiny is this false idea that Americans use to kind of use as an excuse for their actions, when all actuality, Manifest Destiny just supports and promotes violence. It takes advantage of weaker and corrupt nations. We saw that happen to Puerto Rico. We saw that happen to Cuba. We saw that happen to El Salvador. We saw that happen to Honduras. They took advantage of those nations. We see how it happened and when they did it for economical gain. In Mexico, they had all the Mexicans come to America so they could do the rural labor. We saw in El Salvador and Honduras with the UFC, the United Fruit Company. We saw it in Puerto Rico and Cuba with the sugar industry. And we saw how they used that Cold War in places like El Salvador and Cuba to just ruin those countries, essentially. You can't go to Cuba now. El Salvador has had detrimental damages done to their country, lots of lives lost. Like, there's a lot that's happened, and it all goes back to Manifest Destiny. And all these countries are going to have these people that are dealing with terrible conditions because of American influence and interactions. And all they have to do is flee to escape, to go and have more opportunities in life. And they come to America and they're treated with racism, discrimination, and all these terrible things. And the whole reason these people are coming here is because of Americans, and then Americans are the ones telling them, why are you here? Why are you? So I think there's an irony that I noticed in the semester, and I thought it was kind of ironic. Like I just said, I thought it was kind of ironic that they get a lot of hate for being here, but the reason they're here is because of American actions. And I think it's important to highlight that and not let the actions of America go unnoticed and try and label Manifest Destiny as an excuse, but educate people so that they can make more informed responses when they have to talk about Latinos in America. Thank you.